Okay, amazing. So as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing diversifying and decolonising curriculums for both primary and secondary schools today. Cool. So the purpose of this workshop is to understand what decolonising and diversifying the curriculum actually means, and what's one and what is the other, and also how to get started if you haven't already got started, to empower educators, so you and whoever else watches this at a later date, to create a curriculum that mirrors the diversity of the community that it serves. So there's a saying, I can't remember who said it, about wanting to create mirrors and windows in the classroom. So you want to both reflect the diversity of the classroom that you're in, but you also want to create those windows where, if there isn't that diversity reflected in the classroom, the young people are being able to see windows through into other people's cultures and other people's religions. So it's both mirroring and it's both creating opportunities to learn things and engage in different cultures that they perhaps haven't come across before. We'll cover some essential knowledge and understanding that you may need to get started or to continue your journey in decolonising and diversifying your curriculums. So just like housekeeping stuff, if everyone could keep themselves on mute unless they want to ask a question, please feel free to just unmute and jump in whenever you like. You can also use the chat function to input any questions, and we'll leave some time at the end to answer questions. I know some of you have to leave early because of childcare reasons. That's absolutely fine. We will share our email in the chat, so if you want to follow up with anything else, you can email us whenever. We'll be doing an activity using the curriculum audit, which can be downloaded from the chat box now. So there's a link in the chat box. You can click the link and you download it in Word, because it's like a shared document. So this is what we're going to be covering in today's session. A little bit about understanding decolonisation versus diversification and how the two can sort of work together. Understanding some of the limitations of traditional curriculums, but also understanding how decolonising can also look like just simply enhancing what's already there, not expecting everyone to go away and rip up their curriculums and start again. It's just about looking at what you already have through that sort of critical lens and that sort of racial equity lens, and just seeing where there's bits that you can enhance. And in some areas, there may be that need to create new modules of work that might reflect a specific culture that's present in your classroom, but quite often you can enhance what you already have. The importance of decolonisation and diversification. So what is the importance of young people being able to see themselves reflected in what they're learning, and what could be the dangers of if that doesn't happen. Common challenges because there are lots of different challenges when it comes to changing curriculums, especially, decolonising and having that lens. So we'll discuss some of those challenges, and you'll also get an opportunity to ask any questions. And then we can have a look at the audit towards the end. So with that being said, get ready to have discussions. So you can take yourself off mute if you want, but you can also put in the chat box, and when we're doing the audit, there'll be opportunity for everyone just to say what they think and what are their first impressions of the audit, and what are the main things that they need help with. We're not the experts in the room, so we may be able to help you with certain things, but we're sort of here to facilitate the conversation and to facilitate, there might be someone in this on this training that perhaps knows more about a certain area than I do, and we're here to basically facilitate that and connect the dots to where we may lack knowledge. There might be someone else that has it, but we can help with anything that we don't know. We can always go away and find out. And it's okay to ask for help. We're all coming at this topic from different levels of knowledge. So some of you might already be well on your way to decolonising your curriculums, and you might just need a little bit of help here and there, whereas others on the call might to have no idea, you know, what it even means, and they're at the very beginning of their journey, it's absolutely fine to be either. It's okay to ask for help, and being gracious of offering help to our colleagues. If you know something that us in the room doesn't know, please share it with us, because we can all learn from each other, especially when we're talking about this subject. You never know everything about decolonizing, diversifying, always a journey. Okay, so for those that any of our trainings before, you would have seen this, but for those that are new and haven't met us before, this is sort of what we like to set the tone. So comparing what is a non-racist educator versus an anti-racist educator. And this can also be an individual, so in life, if even outside of the classroom, how being a non-racist individual versus that active anti-racist stance. So most of us are non-racist, of course. Most of us in this country are non-racist. And this sort of looks like being afraid of uncomfortable conversations, watches things happen, as so you might be lacking that confidence to get involved when you're seeing things, or when things are happening around you. This could be things that you're seeing on the news, or in politics, or in the classroom. It lacking that confidence to really get involved, and more acting as a spectator. You might be unaware or in denial of your biases. None of us like to think that we have racial biases, because it's not a nice feeling. It makes us feel a bit icky, and makes us feel a bit like we're a bad person. But actually the first stage is sort of accepting that we, you know, wherever we were brought up, we would have been brought up around different messaging, and those inevitably will be reflected in the way that we view the world, and the assumptions that we make about different people. So, you know, it's okay to admit that internally that you have them, and just sort of being on the journey to challenging them. Afraid of teaching social justice, because it can be controversial, and it can be a bit, you know, like releasing a loose cannon in the classroom, and doesn't challenge school systemic inequality. Whereas an anti-racist individual is more of an active stance, whereas non-racist is simply being not racist, and non-confrontational. Anti-racist is more of an active stance, so embraces uncomfortable conversations. In a teaching context, it could look like allowing your students to lead conversations where they have lived experience and expertise that you don't have, allowing them to lead those conversations. Speaking up and disrupting, taking the active role when you're sort of seeing injustice, or when you're sort of observing something that you feel isn't right, is having the confidence to really take the active role. Being aware of and challenging your own biases. So this doesn't mean you've abolished all your own biases. It's just simply that you've acknowledged, and you're on that journey to challenging them. Fights for justice in the taught and untaught curriculum. We'll go into that a little bit later, about the taught curriculum versus pedagogy and cultural literacy. And actively seeks to dismantle bias systems in school and, you know, in life. And we like to think that anti-racist individuals are really part of the solution. And when we go to decolonize and change our curriculums, or audit our curriculums, that's really an active stance. There's nothing passive about changing curriculums, because it can be such a labor intensive, involved job that needs many people to get involved. So this is where we are. We're taking the anti-racist stance when we start looking at our curriculums. Okay, so this is just a little interactive thing. So you can either scan the QR code, or you can click the link in the chat. Where is everyone on their decolonizing and diversifying journey? Do you know lots already? Are you at the beginning? Have you already started diversifying your curriculum? It would be great to hear from everyone. So I'll give everyone maybe 2 minutes to write something. It's also okay if you just want to write it in the chat. Amazing at the beginning. That is absolutely fine. And that's actually quite a fun place to be. is right at the beginning of the journey. So everything is like quite new and exciting, and even small changes can make such a big impact. So yeah, that's an exciting place to be. Another person, we have already made a start as a federation. Amazing, that's great. It'd be great maybe later on, just sharing a little bit about what that looks like. Because so you can really tackle this problem through so many different angles. So it'd be great to hear how your federation has started, basically. Another person, first time at the beginning. I'm just going to check the chat. Okay, amazing. So Bijal and Annabelle, we have lots of ideas and we have conducted research, but we are not where we would like to be. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. Yeah, if it makes you feel any better, you know, we've been doing curriculum work with some schools, and it feels like sometimes it feels like there's no end to it, because you know, you could always do more and you could always, you know, be better. But even starting that journey is really great. And the fact that you've conducted research is a really important part of the journey, because feeding back, getting that feedback and that contribution from the pupil and parent body is really, really important. Salma, the school and the department have taken a key focus on equality and diversity of our curriculum, both history and RE. Amazing, that's really good. History is a really, really important subject, and also RE, allowing RE to reflect the diversity of the religions in your student body. Amazing, cool. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay. Okay, cool. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's the difference between decolonizing and diversifying, and how do the two sort of interact with each other. Amazing. I'm just going to read one more out from Jennifer. Taking an active role and putting ideas forward with support of other staff, especially in purchasing books. Amazing. That's good that you've had that support from your other staff members. That's really important. And it's always so much nicer when you're able to do this work as a team. And please share with us the books that if you have any books that you recommend. I'm sure we would all be really pleased to hear about them. Okay, so decolonizing versus diversification, and how the two sort of interact. So decolonizing the curriculum refers to the process of challenging and dismantling the colonial legacies and Eurocentric perspectives that have historically and still presently shaped the curriculum in the UK. So it's looking about where we came from, how our curriculum historically been shaped, and how, when they were being shaped, what did the colonial legacies look like, and how is that still affecting things today? So it involves critically examining the content, the sources, the narratives within the curriculum, and addressing any biases. This can also look like active biases, so biases that, like stereotypes and things that are being shared, but also things that are missed from the curriculum, so omissions and misrepresentations related to colonial history. One example of this could be how we celebrate people that were involved in the abolition of slavery. Often we talk about white activists that were really involved, and therefore it paints a picture that Black enslaved people were very passive and weren't involved in the abolition, even though they were. And there's lots of heroes that simply the omission of them being spoken about sort of paints that picture. Decolonizing seeks to empower students to critically engage with the complexities of colonialism, its impact and its ongoing relevance. So even taking a very small scenario like that, it empowers your students to develop those critical thinking skills. So how do they look at something and they critically engage in it? So whose is present, whose voice is being left out, why was it left out, and what was their goal behind this. And skills like this often will help them in later life, and also how to distinguish fake news on social media. And it's just like a really good life skill for them to have. And then diversifying is focusing on ensuring a broad perspective of representation. So a broader representation of diverse identities, experiences, and perspectives within the curriculum. So diversifying aims to acknowledge and validate the experiences and contributions of individuals and communities from different social, cultural, and historic backgrounds. So including a wide range of voices, perspectives, and sort of representations within the curriculum. So if we think of a brick wall, decolonizing is like taking out the bricks of the wall that no longer serve us, that sort of pose some sort of like old-fashioned or maybe harmful views, or views that just aren't relevant to the modern day Britain. And then diversifying would be putting in new different bricks to make sure that the wall is sort of representative of the multiple identities that make Britain so amazing and rich and good. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And an important thing to note is African and Caribbean history began way before enslavement. So this is also something that the national curriculum doesn't do so well. Often the first instance of Black history that we talk about is slavery, when there's so much history before then, and it paints this picture of this sort of oppressive narrative, when there's so much more to explore. And it's really important that how things look now aren't always how they've looked, and how colonialism and slavery have shaped how things look now. So yeah, that's an important note. Okay. So decolonization, when we're focusing on race, culture, and ethnicity, does the current curriculum explore different races, ethnicities, and cultures? Are there perspectives of marginalized groups, or is it just a single majority perspective? Also, when we talk about race, culture, and ethnicity, we can also talk about religion. And religion, we've had discussions about this recently. Does religion count into when we talk about racism? Well, so there's been a recent theory that's come up, is that when your religion can be determined by something obvious about you, and then people can engage in a hate crime against you, but based on that one thing. So let's say you're a female, you're wearing hijab, it's a clear sign that you are Muslim. So people can engage in hate crimes or hate towards you. So that's how it can count as racism. So even though religion would be classed as something else, when people can assume your religion or assume your identity from something about you, and then engage in sort of hate crimes against it, it crosses that barrier between racism and religious hatred. So I hope that makes sense. Does the current curriculum uphold any harmful or common or unhelpful stereotypes? Does the curriculum explore cultures of your student cohort? How can we successfully expose our students to the cultures and customs of others? So that's coming back to, you want windows and you want mirrors in your classroom. You want your curriculum to mirror back the diversity of your student cohort, but you also want to create those windows where they can look into others, into other people's customs, other people's cultures that perhaps they're not seeing around them. Are there any subtle colonial views that are being projected in the current curriculum? So one of those subtle colonial views would be, by starting Black history at the point of enslavement, that's it, like a colonial view that there was no history before then, or there was no, Black excellence before enslavement. So that would be something that's quite subtle, and that's a result of simply the omission of pre-enslavement history. So we say, when we talk about enslavement and slavery, we use the term like enslaved people rather than, yeah. So I guess finding that correct definition, I think, is really important. But we use enslaved people rather than slaves or anything like that, because we want to sort of highlight that it was done to them. People weren't born slaves, if that makes sense. They were enslaved by a group that was external to them. But yeah, thank you. Okay. Next, diversification, when we talk about gender and sexuality. So we want to take an intersectional approach, which we will talk about later as well. So diversification can also include like gender and sexuality. So looking at the curriculum in a way that supports diversity based on the protected characteristics. So all of the different protected characteristics, and how do you sort of weave in the diversification in multiple ways. So is there concrete presence of recognition and reference of voices from these diverse perspectives? So for example, role models within the curriculum, or authors or guest speakers. Does the curriculum celebrate voices, authors, stories of female, transgender and non-binary individuals? And for those actually in primary schools, I would love to hear your thoughts on the new guidance that has been issued by the DfE saying basically within primary schools, you shouldn't be talking about transgender or non-binary issues, and gender shouldn't be presented as a sort of scale. So how does that link in with your curriculum about sort of having positive role models of different, so not necessarily talking about gender or non-binary or trans, but still having that representation of different people and of different identities? So if anyone from primary school wants to share their thoughts about that, I would love to hear it. You can also pop up something in the chat later and we can touch on it again. Does your curriculum celebrate voices, authors and stories of the LGBTQ+ community? Is the history of this community explored? So the history as well as present day role models. Okay, terminology. This is quite a chunky slide, so I'll skim over it and I'll send you the slides afterwards as well. Thank you, Bijal and Annabelle. It's difficult because the children want to talk about it, and it's difficult to know where we stand without it coming across as us putting our views on them. Some of our community have very strong views about it. Yeah, this has been something that we've come up against as well, is that schools in some communities where the communities have a very, very strong view about LGBTQ+ communities or trans communities or non-binary and gender being that sort of fluid choice, have very strong views about that. And how do you navigate having conversations or having role models, so exposing the young people to role models from different genders and different backgrounds, whilst navigating the views of the community and also navigating the new guidance published by DfE? So it's a tricky one, and we haven't found a correct way of doing it either. And it's one of those things that I think needs a little bit of thought and a little bit of testing. So yeah, we're always open to hearing about ingenious ways that people have navigated that, particularly in primary schools. Okay, some important terminology. So inclusion. So inclusion, this word gets thrown around quite a lot. So we can think of inclusion as a continuous process. So inclusion is a continuous process that requires leadership and active participation, both from staff members and students and parents to value diversity, leverage it fully and integrate it into everyday. So in a curriculum point of view, inclusion isn't just, right, we wake up one day and we include lots of different diverse voices and then that's it. we're inclusive. Inclusion is that journey, and it's going to be that sort of constant reference where you're constantly reviewing, and you might do really, really well in sort of including some communities, but there might be other communities that aren't that well represented. So it's a little bit of a journey that you can go on slowly and allow people to feed in. Intersectionality, we're going to go into that more later, but intersectionality is the acknowledgement that we have multiple overlapping identities. So racism is a protected identity, then you have gender, and then you have your ability, and you have lots of different protected characteristics. And it's not about saying, all right, so you're a woman and you're heterosexual and you're Indian, so these are your 3 protected characteristics, and you know, we lump them all together. It's about understanding how those different identities intersect and how that results in people having more or less compounded marginalized experiences. Prejudice is an opinion or a feeling, usually negative, about someone that is based on a person's membership in a particular group. So this is normally their membership in a group that's linked with their protected characteristics, and prejudice is that sort of, it's often not based on fact or their own personal opinions or experiences. It's normally based on assumptions around that group that person belongs to or is part of. Cultural capital, this can also be known as cultural literacy. Cultural literacy is a more inclusive term. This refers to the skills, knowledge, attitudes, tastes that can be assessed and used by individuals, to signal. This is a bad definition. But essentially, in schools, cultural capital is all of the extra things outside of the work, outside of the lesson plans and the actually taught curriculum. Cultural capital and cultural literacy is all the different things that a young person is exposed to that leaves them quite like rich in sort of knowledge, and rich in sort of that knowledge around lots of different cultures. So this can look like careers fairs, school trips, anything extra that is added to empower your curriculum. That's basically what cultural capital is. Structural inequality refers to the unequal access to resources and opportunities between different groups of people in society. So when we talk about institutional racism or structural racism, it's this structural within systems. In education, this might mean schooling that benefits some groups whilst marginalizing or reproducing disadvantage for others. So within some councils and some boroughs in London, we still have the BAME attainment gap, and that could signify that the education system is sort of has been designed with one group in mind and perhaps doesn't benefit other groups. And this is also reflected a lot in young people with neurodiversities, and how the way that the schooling system is set up is for neurotypical children. And often neurodiverse children can struggle to sort of fit in with some of the norms and some of like that structure. So this would be structural inequality, how something has been set up with one group in mind and hasn't really taken into account other groups. And it results in that difference of opportunities and difference in outcomes. Oh, my slides keep freezing. Jennifer, could you come off mute and talk a little bit about that, because that's a new term for me and I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think equanimity, what I'm trying to say is that, so we speak a lot about equality and making people equal, but we are not all starting at the same place. So therefore, we have to make sure that we are making things equal, so that we are starting from the same place. Am I made that clear? Have I explained that?
Yeah, that makes 100% sense. Equanimity, I've never heard of that. I like that term. And I guess that's it kind of ties into that difference between equality and equity, I guess. In that equality is sort of that everyone gets the same thing, but equity is that more everyone gets what they need, because yeah, you're right, we're not all starting from the same point, and based on our identities, we're going to face different types of barriers and different numbers of barriers like in our life. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I like that term, and I'm gonna do some research around that. Okay, so important considerations before diversifying and decolonizing. So one of the main things I would say is the racial literacy of the staff that are doing it, that are doing the diversifying and decolonizing, is really, really important. So even if that looks like, if you're at the very beginning of the journey and things are looking like quite intense or things are looking quite daunting, it could simply be putting the actual changing of the curriculum on hold and allowing 6 months of you and your team sort of building up your racial literacy. And that could be reading different books. So we have a book list, and someone, you know, everyone that's read a really amazing book around, you know, anti-racism within education, please submit your answers in the chat, that'd be great. But there's a few resources on our book list that we can recommend as well. So it could be that, you know, the changing of the curriculum is put on hold and everyone is building up their racial literacy and building up their knowledge of what anti-racism actually looks like in a modern day Britain and in an educational context. There's a book by Orleen Badu called How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom that is amazing. It's on Amazon. I think it's like £12 or something really cheap. But I always recommend that book to help to build your understanding and that base level racial literacy. And it's such an easy read as well. And so I definitely recommend that. Also, other things: to create an inclusive curriculum, we need to integrate diversity and decolonial ideas seamlessly. So people should have regular exposure to non-white and non-Christian perspectives and avoid the notion of otherness. This is much easier said than done. Instead of isolated units like diverse voices or diversity in science or women in science, different identities, or, you know, different non-stereotypical identities should be woven in to these to the curriculum seamlessly, rather than only celebrating Black female scientists in Black History Month, for example. It would be seamlessly weaving different people into the curriculum so that it's not, oh, it's not special that someone is outside of the norm. That makes sense. Yes, How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom. I love that book. Yeah. And yeah, definitely, if you're in a school, definitely start up like a book club or something like that, where you can read a chapter and then come together and discuss it. We've seen that work really, really well in other schools. Okay, teachers, especially at GCSE and A-level, face challenges in delivering externally mandated content. Yes, so when we talk about assessments and when we talk about GCSE, A-level, AS level, it's really difficult to diversify and decolonize content that is externally mandated, and then also it's linking directly to what's in the exams. And it can be really tricky how to decolonize and change some of that curriculum when you're trying to follow what is necessary to enable your students to do really well in their exams. So that is a bit of an art form, and we've got some examples to share with you later. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. So to ensure successful change, it is a gradual change. It's sort of changing one thing at a time, allowing students, allowing parents and community to feedback on how that is representing them, and changing things gradually. And that feedback loop is really, really important to really enable that sort of cohesive representation, and that cohesive decolonization is allowing other people to feed in. the approach should not burden individuals with specific identities. So it should not be down to the global majority staff members to decolonize the whole curriculum, or it should not be down to the LGBTQ teachers to diversify the curriculum in that way. It needs to be everyone, a holistic approach of everyone coming together and doing it together. Okay. Right, the importance of diversifying and decolonizing and diversifying. So the way that the information that we're taught impacts the way our brain organizes information. Our cognitive processes and perspectives are significantly influenced by the knowledge and narratives presented to us. In this context, the call for decolonizing the curriculum is extremely important. Misinformation or lack of diverse perspectives leads to distorted beliefs and perpetuate biases. So if we simply never hear about a certain group in science, then the assumption we can make is that science is only for white males, for example, when of course that is not the case. Primary school is often the first institutional experience for young people, and students are actively exploring their identity outside of their family network, exploring their sense of self and where they fit into the world around them. So this is why it's so important in primary schools to have this diversity and have young people exposed to multiple different identities. Key stage 3 is also a really critical process in a young person's educational journey. Marked by significant development of a young person's identity outside of that family environment. So sort of how they fit into their friendship groups and what's going to be their identity outside of their family home. So when a young person is exposed to inclusive and diverse narratives at this age and these multiple stages of development, it can open a whole world of possibilities for the individual and can help in fostering that positive self-image, developing respect and empathy for themselves and for others as well. So this concept is explained in the See Her campaign, which is about sort of female representation in media. And I'm just going to play that quick video for us now. Okay, 1 second. One second. I'm just gonna enable.
We've been working to change these stereotypes. That's why we're encouraging more girls to pursue their love for science and technology and engineering and math. That's why we've highlighted women trailblazers and encouraged media to depict more examples of women in STEM, because it's hard to be what you can't see.
Be better fathers who love your daughters. Be engaged. Be a better employer. Be better. Be better. Be better. Be better.
And we'll rise up. I like the waves. We'll rise up. In spite of the ache, we'll rise up. And we'll do it 1,000 times again.
I feel, did anyone see that video? You just heard it. Okay. Apologies. Sorry, I think we had some technical difficulties. Did everyone get the gist of the video? Yeah, Okay, perfect, cool. So it's simply about representation of women instead, and also women in media. And one of the things I really liked was, if you can't see her, you can't be her, or if you can see her, you can be her. And that's one of the really important things about why we want to change curriculum and improve representation, because we want our young people in our institutions to believe that they can be anything and they can do anything that they want. And if they can't see those positive role models, it's really difficult for them to imagine it for themselves. Amazing. Yeah. I just saw Jennifer's comment about Black History Month. Yes, African Caribbean people are present 365 days of the year. There's no such thing as Black History Month. And yeah, I do agree with you to a certain extent. I know that some schools and some people like to celebrate it because it's one of those times to really highlight, and a lot of young people enjoy creating creating a schedule of activity for the month to really shine a light on their heritage and their presence. But it should not be one of those things that people roll out once a year and they do everything in that month and then nothing is done for the rest of the term, or nothing is done for the rest of the year. Black History Month should simply highlight what is done throughout the year and be one of those nice things where they shine a light on certain things. One thing that we don't celebrate is South Asian Heritage Month, which is in June, that I'm sort of trying to get more schools to sort of celebrate, because it's just, I think it's a nice way to allow young people to say, how would you like your culture and your heritage to be represented in this month? But it shouldn't be a tokenistic gesture. It should be something that is weaved in throughout the year. So yeah, I completely agree. Okay. Alternatively, if a young person isn't exposed to an inclusive or diverse curriculum or narratives, this can result in, for global majority students, having lower expectations for themselves and not understanding their full potential, experiencing frustration that they can't quite understand, resulting in self-destructive behaviors or mental health disorders. And for white students, having a one-dimensional view of the world and the people that have made contributions to our world is really detrimental. And there's going to be a less likelihood to develop respect and empathy towards others with different backgrounds. So it benefits everyone to have improved representation and improved diversity in our curriculum. It doesn't just benefit global majority people. Okay, I'm going to share this video properly this time. We're going to watch this short video from Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie, and we're going to hear her story, and we're going to have a think about why representation is important, and why representation in books and literature is really important. So bear with me. I'm going to make sure I share it properly this time. Okay, cool.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow, they ate apples, and they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle
Okay, so just watching that portion of the video, what were the themes that Chimamanda was talking about? People can come off mute or you can write in the chat. Why was her journey of literature and her journey of representation important? What happens when we only see one type of person or one type of story? Yeah, you begin to believe that that is the only normal or acceptable narrative. You get a limited perspective, yeah. And we last year at primary school, and before I'd even seen this video, our teacher was talking about how one of their students, I think she was like year 4 or something, quite young, was such an amazing writer, such a beautiful writer, but in all of the stories that she was writing, all of her characters were white and blonde haired and blue eyed, and that didn't represent, you know, who the young person was who was writing the stories. And it really like shocked the teachers, and they were like, you know, are we that bad? Like, what's happening? What's going on? And it wasn't that, you know, they were bad. They just hadn't realized that a lot of the stories and a lot of the literature that their young people at that school were being exposed to had characters with white skin and blonde hair and blue eyes, and they just simply hadn't seen it, and they hadn't seen it because it was so normalized, I guess. So Salma has written, to battle misconceptions early on, a big one tends to be around migration patterns around the world. Yeah, Key Stage 3 and even Key Stage 4 are very confused about the presence of Black Tudors, for example. Yes, absolutely. And this is one of those things that has simply been left out of the curriculum. It's been dropped out of the curriculum for whatever reason, to create whatever type of narrative. And yeah, it creates the conception that migration only started happening post-slavery and post-colonization. And that's absolutely not true. And it can lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of misconceptions, because if no one's ever told you that, then, you know, what are you going to believe? Okay. We're going to watch the second half of this video, and I want us to think about how we can manifest stereotypes from the stories that we've been told.
Middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story of Africans, being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't
Okay, so looking at that second half of the video, she talks about a single story. What stereotypes did Chimamanda's roommate make about her and Africa in general, like an entire continent? And take a moment to reflect if there might be single stories within your current and what might be the impact of this. So I'll give everyone a few minutes just to reflect, write anything in the chat. Are there any single stories within your current curriculum, single perspectives that can result in sort of negative or stereotypes about entire areas or entire groups of people? I like that, Jennifer. History is not his story, it's everyone's story. I like that. So just reflecting on your own curriculums, where might there be a single story that is resulting in stereotypes? Right, I'm going to move on. And if anyone does put anything in the chat, then I will always come back to it. Okay. So, common challenges when decolonising and diversifying curriculums. in essence of time, because we've only got an hour left, I'll push on. So we recently had a training with Orline Badu, and we've also read her book. We absolutely love reading her stuff and talking about her. And she shared observations that she had observed through her work with schools. And these are some of the student challenges that she's observed. So curriculum's only becoming diverse in October, with little diverse narratives throughout the year. And that again comes back to that Black history is not just Black History Month. Black History Month is everywhere. There are strong narratives of oppression when talking about Black and brown nations. One example of this is about the migration patterns and not understanding what was going on before. So only when talking about Black and brown nations, there's that strong oppressive narrative, and not that empowerment and that joy and that resilience and resistance that is present. It's just not present within the curriculum. Diversity is important for all students, not just global majority students. A lack of knowledge around recent and local role models with agency. So role models that are local and that are recent, have done amazing things, and that have taken to tackle a problem within their community or within the world, and they've obtained solutions. And lack of understanding about civil rights outside of South Africa and the USA. It can often be one of those things that whenever we're talking about in Black History Month, to just roll out the same role models again and again that aren't local and that don't relate to us. There's so many British role models that have done amazing things for civil rights, and it's just about highlighting them, not resting on the stereotypical South African and USA role models. Some teacher observations is concerns around tokenism. So people wanting to diversify their curriculums and decolonize, but they don't know how to do it in a non-tokenistic way because they've never been taught how to do it. Teachers attempting to teach things that they were never taught. When I was growing up, these things were never taught in the classroom, and it was we got so many single stories in the curriculum when I was growing up, and so it requires that sort of relearning process that adults have to go through in order to have the knowledge to diversify their classrooms. There could be a lack of help, lack of accessible help, a lack of dedicated time. There are so many things that teachers need to be doing and need to be, the workload is so much. And so when you have a lack of dedicated time to decolonize and diversify, which is can be a lengthy process, that can be a huge barrier. And lack of resources to support with curriculum change. Yes, absolutely. Salma, Naz, do you mind copying the email that's in the chat, and we'll make sure we will email everyone the slides. Okay, cool. So now we're going to get into how to approach changing the curriculum and a holistic approach that we have devised that we think is quite a well-rounded holistic approach. So there are 4 areas essentially. So you have the curriculum, and there are these 4 areas that all feed into what we call the curriculum, a holistic approach. So number 1 is subject content and lessons. So the schemes of work, the subjects, the content of the lessons, essentially what is covered in the taught curriculum. Then we have pedagogy. So how do we teach? How do we encourage critical thinking? So this is, highlighting when you're going through curriculums, this would be like highlighting in certain areas what voices are present here, what voices aren't present here. What do you think the purpose of having one voice present and the other voice wasn't? Encouraging them to develop and hone their critical thinking skills. What can we do in the untaught curriculum? And what areas are there for students to explore their own opinions? This can also be discussing things like social justice and systemic problems that, perhaps they want to get involved with solving in their communities and things like that. Assessments. How do we decolonize and diversify assessments? How do we prepare students from diverse backgrounds for national assessments that may not draw on experience or knowledge that they have? And a lot of how do we work with assessments that are dictated and out of our control? How do we prepare our students for that? And then we have cultural capital, also known as cultural literacy. So what is your cultural literacy offering? How does your cultural literacy offer diverse perspectives? And how does it sort of smash stereotypes? So we're not getting the same stereotypes around lack of women in maths and science and things like that. Does your cultural capital offer opportunities for all students? I'm just gonna have a quick look if there's any comments in the chat. Yes. Yes, Salma, I'm just going to read this out quickly. May I ask for some advice on how to actively verbally draw attention to different perspectives used in lessons without it seeming tokenistic? Yes, yes. So I think one of the main things is planning before getting started. So with the audit that we'll include at the end of this, it might already be in the chat already, is sitting down with a curriculum team with multiple people that are like auditing or diversifying the same curriculums, and having that approach of auditing first, seeing what you currently have, seeing what needs to be put in, and then coming up with solutions, but also testing them. So that could be, you've come up with solutions of how to diversify history and how to implement multiple perspectives. I would say asking other teachers and students of history to feed back on how they're taking it. So then you're allowing multiple people to feed into the process of feeding back on whether they feel, if they are from that identity, if they feel that is tokenistic, or maybe it doesn't represent them fully. So I would definitely say changing curriculums and diversifying is like a slow and steady process, changing things, asking for advice, taking that feedback, and then implementing it more. So I think it can be tricky to navigate tokenistic and non-tokenistic, but I say firstly plan, take an intersectional approach. Don't just say, right, we need more racial diversity, so let's just put loads of different black faces in a certain subject. We want to be looking at the multiple identities that people hold, and what are their multiple, sort of what's their lived experience from those multiple identities. So taking that intersectional approach, and then trialing and testing, and you'll always get amazing feedback from your students. And you can also do this with parents as well. I hope that helps, but please feel free to email me as well, and we can discuss this further. Okay, subject content and lessons. So this is often what we think about when we talk about curriculum decolonizing and diversifying. It's the actual chunky bits of the lessons. What does that say? What are we teaching? So this includes auditing your current schemes of work and examining what voices are present and what voices aren't present. So finding ways to embed diversity into your current schemes of work. So again, we don't want everyone to go home and rip up schemes of work and start all over again. It's looking at what you already have and creatively thinking about where to embed diversity, and then also getting feedback from your students. In some areas, you may have to create new units of work where certain experiences are important to the school, but there isn't a way of authentically embedding that into what's already there. And number 3, exploring your learning resources. So your textbooks, your literature, your videos, and ensuring that you're offering representation and diverse narratives. Sorry, my slides are stuck. Okay, so this is a case study from Fairfield High School in Bristol, who were trying to decolonize their history curriculums. So I'll just read out these quotes from them. So when exploring World War I, we included lessons about diverse soldiers from across the British Empire. We expanded our medieval unit to incorporate lessons about the Golden Age of Persia. In our Elizabethan England unit, we looked at links between 16th century England and the Islamic world using Jerry Bronten's book. this Orient Isle. I've never read that book, so if anyone has, I'd love to get your thoughts. So this was ways that they sort of had a look at what was already present and then looked on how to improve and diversify those. And then there's also creating new units. Over time, we were able to develop some completely new units, a unit on the history of migration, one on Somali history, and one on the history of British civil rights campaigns in the 1960s. The unit on Somalia took a long time to write, involving considerable community collaboration. But for the community we serve, it seemed to us essential that our students should have some knowledge of Somali history. So this is an example of how when it's necessary to write new content and how you can involve the community in this. Let me have a look at the chat quickly. Amazing. Okay. Amazing. Jennifer's gonna send a list of books and resources and places to visit that can be added to what is already being used. That is amazing. It's always good if someone has really good resources, sharing it with us, and then we can sort of share it out to everyone. Orient Isle is a really good read, good way to ensure that we keep diverse curriculum even while teaching the GCSE spec. Amazing. Yeah, that's great. And we actually worked with a school in Ealing, and they were primary school, and they wanted to diversify 3 key areas. So they did music, geography, and their reading literature. And they basically wanted to ensure that certain less represented groups were being represented. So they had representation between some groups, but there was lots of people sort of slipping through the gaps and not being represented by the curriculum. So what they did is they had a parent session. So they invited parents to come in, and they had these big round tables with a teacher at every table, and they had sort of big bits of paper where they would brainstorm different things, and they had a range of different resources for parents to come in and look at, and they would basically share their ideas on how they would like to see their representation represented within that curriculum, so within the music curriculum or within the geography curriculum. And what ended up happening is that a lot of parents were sharing things that they had learned at school from growing up wherever they grew up, and how they absolutely loved talking about certain aspects or certain bits of geography, or they loved learning about certain aspects of music, and that's been lost since they've migrated or since they've moved, and they really wanted the school to try and uphold some of those things that they've learned and were really precious to them growing up. So that it was just one event that was an hour and a half, and that has resulted in so many sort of amazing contributions and so many more parents feeling much more engaged with the school, because they feel like they've had a contribution to the curriculum, essentially. Okay, now we have pedagogy. So examining the current teaching methods. The teaching methods employed should encourage critical thinking and provide opportunities to form and express their own opinions. So pedagogy should be inclusive and allow for the untaught curriculum to encourage informal learning as student-driven inquiry. So this can be like, even whilst using like standard traditional curriculums, the way that the curriculum is being examined and the way that it's being approached could be through a critical lens, that critical thinking of who is represented, who is not represented, what's being omitted from these stories. And then, so one example is in a museum, sort of going in and rewriting the plaques from a different perspective, or from a different, from a different lens. So it's still the same curriculum, but the pedagogy has changed. And that is what's equipping the young people with the skills. So examples of inclusive pedagogy. So 2 tactics that we sort of share is a process called reading against the grain, looking at a content and being able to produce a perspective around what voices, identities are actively left out of the conversation. This boosts critical engagement, exploring dominant cultural perspectives, and then students can rewrite the content or the play or the plaque in a museum with new representations, new voices and new experiences. When a student learns this skill really well, it can give them an advantage in their standard assessments. So for example, if a young person is sitting a GCSE and it's tapping into a question that is asking them to identify with, you know, an experience that they've never identified with, they can use those skills of exploring what voices have been left out, what identities have been left out, to really sort of use their own knowledge and adapt it into that context. So even when assessments can't be changed, introducing this different pedagogy can give students different skills to be able to adapt, essentially. And then we have meanwhile elsewhere. So when studying parts of the national curriculum, taking a moment to give a global perspective by exploring what was happening at the same time elsewhere in the world. So for example, exploring pre-slavery and British Empire. So when at the very beginnings of the British Empire, what else was happening in the world? What other cultures were thriving, and how did this intersect with what would happen next? So there's so many brilliant examples of this. So when we're looking at one thing and it feels very, very like big and very stereotypical and it's only offering one story, it's just taking that step back. What else is happening in the world that offers a different perspective? Okay. Examples of inclusive pedagogy. So I'm going to share this video. It's of a lady, she's an American lady, Dr. Shelley Jones. So she's a professor, and she talks about culturally relevant pedagogy, and she uses mathematics as her sort of source of focus for this one. It's a long video, but I'm only going to show you a few clips, but I will share the link with you. So if you want to watch it in your own time, then you can.
Are you having trouble trying to keep with your professor? You have to try Otter. Here's how it works. Let's say I'm in class. I just hit record and
it gets that ratio. First of all, students come to school to learn. We know that.
I can't hear that. It's very quiet for some reason. Hold on, sorry.
Know as educators that what students learn in the classroom is not all there is. Johanna Hayes, our teacher of the year, and she's from Waterbury, Connecticut, she really believes that it takes more than what you do in the classroom. And so I agree with that, and I think most educators know that. Gloria Latson-Billings says, culturally relevant teaching has 3 criteria. One is that students have academic success. So it's not enough for the access. We need the attainment. 2, that students have cultural competence. But let's face it, we are also hearing that teachers need cultural competence as well. And finally, that children develop a critical consciousness. We have to help students, and this is where the politically comes in. We have to help students understand and be empowered to challenge the status quo. Latson-Billings goes on to say that schools often do not really support culturally different students because they don't provide a social context for learning, where students can have access to the knowledge in a comfortable, in a familiar way, and we heard earlier, in a safe way. So the question is, can we teach mathematics in a way that students can connect to themselves and to their communities and to their identity? Can we teach in a way that empowers students to challenge injustice? And most of all, can we teach in a way that honors students and their cultural and their intellectual greatness. There's a lot being said there. So let's think about this. If we want to empower students, the tasks in our classroom have to change, right? So the current curriculum we have is just not going to do it. Oh, I want to tell you about my young lady there. So she participates in a Saturday STEM program. And I worked with a group of students there to create clocks for Benjamin Banneker Day. And that particular day, they were able to use mathematics equations to go around the hands of the clock, and also just to show their artistic side. And she, of course, is very artistic.
Sorry, everyone. Around.
Eva Gay says that every student has a strength. Every student does something well, and that's what we have to start with. So here's some real life stories. If we want to connect to students, these are some of the things that we could do. These are researchers that do math for social justice and culturally relevant math. Bill Tate worked with the teacher to do a project with students to sort of learn about their community. And what they wanted to do was to count the number of liquor stores in their neighborhood, and they did that. They took a walk around their community, and then they took the bus to the suburban community, and they counted the number of liquor stores, or package stores, if we want to say it nicely, in that neighborhood. And they found out, to their surprise, that there were a lot more liquor stores in their neighborhood. And so they wrote their city council. There's the politically again, right? So when I first started teaching, I didn't know about that word politically. I said, that's not my place. But what I'm learning is that it is my place. And so anyway, these students wrote a letter to their city council, and they asked to close 13 liquor stores that were in 1,000 feet of their school. How they know that? They did research. So students are learning, and they're dealing with issues from their community, and they're using.
Okay, I'll stop it there, but I do encourage everyone to watch this video in full because it's really, really interesting. And we hear a lot about well, how do you decolonize certain subjects? How do you diversify math? How do you diversify science? When it seems like it's very very like monodimensional and just about the numbers and the theories and things like that. But you can, and this is why I like this example so much, is because it's using maths to intersect with social justice. And one aspect of diversifying and decolonizing, especially through pedagogy, is connecting things to social justice. How can you use each individual subject? How is that relevant to what's going on in the world and what's going on in their communities? And how can that be linked into social justice and equity for different communities? I also liked what she said about tapping into every student's intellect and excellence, I think she said. And so when we talk about diversifying and decolonizing, it's not just, oh, everyone should have a turn, or everyone should have at least one thing in the curriculum about them. It's about acknowledging that every single student in your classrooms has academic excellence and has cultural excellence, and how can what we're teaching bring out that excellence in every student. I know that's easier said than done, but by looking at things from that perspective, rather than the perspective of everyone should have a turn, everyone should have something in there about them, it's how does what we teach tap into the excellence of every single student. Okay, Moving on to assessments, decolonising and diversifying assessments means creating evaluation methods that are culturally responsive and that don't disadvantage students from diverse backgrounds. It's about ensuring that assessments are fair and reflective of different contexts that students may come from, rather than relying on a standard set of experiences or knowledge bases. When it comes to national assessments that aren't within your control, it's about exposing your students to regular, culturally appropriate assessments so that students are building up their confidence and learning how to adapt their knowledge in different scenarios. And it's also building up that confidence to say, yes, I am good at assessments, I am good at exams. If regular culturally relevant assessments are they're doing them and they're thriving, then they'll know how to adapt their knowledge and their experience and have that confidence to do so when these big national assessments come up. One example of this is in art. Okay, so we recently did some work with a school and we worked with the art team to look at their assessments. And they were lucky in that with their assessments, students can pick the project that they want, but from a recommended list of artists, for example, in GCSE art. And they basically took from the moment that a young person takes a GCSE art exam, and they worked backwards, and they said, how many touch points do we need to introduce to a young person so that by the time that they take their GCSE exam, they are confident and self-aware and have that sort of really positive self-identity, that they can take those recommended artists and they can adapt it to something that is relevant to their identity. And they realized that in order to have these really amazing, confident GCSE students, they needed to implement more diversity, more diverse artists, and more work around examining your personal identity and the empowerment that comes with that way before. So then they started looking at, what does the year 9 art curriculum look like? What does the year 10 art curriculum look like? What does the year 7 art curriculum look like? How do we build up that confidence? Cool. Amazing. Cool. Thank you, Salma. Oh, my slides are stuck in. Okay, then we have cultural capital. The term cultural capital is being gradually replaced with cultural literacy, because cultural capital reflects that there's this capital, like this elite in society, and we all have to strive to get to that elite. That's not the case. Cultural capital and cultural literacy is around giving people extra strings to their bow in a way. So outside of what's being taught, what are all the other things that are giving them mirrors and windows into different perspectives, into different career paths, and into different cultures and religions, things like that. So the extracurricular offerings of a school, such as work experience opportunities, field trips, guest speakers, careers advice, should all contribute to a student's cultural literacy by providing a broad spectrum of experiences and perspectives. Critically analyze whether opportunities are accessible and relevant to all students, irrespective of their background, and that they serve to enrich the educational experience by exposing students to a wide range of cultural viewpoints and professional pathways. This links back a little bit to the See Her campaign. Is the cultural capital offering feeding in to the view that your students will feel like they can do anything, or they can do what they want to do? That they know that art or maths or STEM or being an astronaut is all accessible to them? Is that feeding into that? Or is there a subconscious narrative that actually these careers are only for this type of people? So, cool. So some examples of diverse cultural capital. There are some really amazing field trips. Depends where you are, in London, there are some really amazing places in Hounslow. But one example is the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton. They've always got so many different things going on there, loads of different galleries, and they're always doing different things, and they're always really amazing. So definitely have a look. But we can also prompt critical engagement in traditional places. So one example is a visit to the British Museum, exploring the bust of Septimus Severus. So exploring how he's presented, and his heritage and his background, exploring whose voices are represented and who aren't. So doing an activity, rewriting plaques to explain artifacts. So with Septimus Severus, the fact that he was black is often left out of the conversation. And if you look at the bust, you would have no idea. And it's only been recently that there's been much more research into the history of him and Roman emperor and everything like that. And so that could be an amazing critical engagement where we're looking at him. What do we think if we don't know anything about him? And then actually exploring his history and seeing how is that being left out of the conversation. Another example in Cambridge University is the students have campaigned for the Benin bronzes to be repatriated. And that's a long, lengthy journey. That's a different story. But when they have been repatriated, the students want to leave the space where the bronzes were being held blank. And they want to tell the story of the process of how the bronzes were stolen in the first place, the campaigning, the student activism, and how the journey ended and then basically being repatriated. So rather than just getting rid of history and sort of pretending it never existed, we're highlighting that journey of activism and that history, those sort of untold stories of British history. Okay, I'm not gonna play this video because I'm just thinking about time and I want to give you guys time to do the audit. But this is a video about intersectionality. So when we start thinking about diversifying the curriculum or certain subject areas, it's important to take an intersectional approach. And so not just view each protected characteristic as a standalone identity. We have to be aware of how other protected characteristics that intersect with race and gender and ethnicity and religion cause compounded challenges due to having multiple marginalized identities. So there's this video that was commissioned by Newcastle University, and it basically uses shapes and how different shapes of the different marginalized identities, and as they come together, it forms a brand new shape. Not every person with the same set of identities will experience the same level of marginalization. Our colleague Julie also uses the crossroads analogy. So if you're standing at one intersection in a road, you basically have two rows of traffic that are likely to hit you. If you're standing at like a cross intersection, you have multiple cars and multiple lines of traffic that are likely to hit you. So having multiple identities, the frequency of being hit by microaggressions or by prejudice is increased, and also what that looks like can be different for everyone. Okay, part 4, how to use the audit framework. So the audit framework basically breaks down the 4 areas that we've spoken about. So we talked about subject content, so schemes of work. We talked about pedagogy, how to link social justice and critical analysis into the curriculum. We talked about assessments and decolonising, giving every single student, regardless of background and identity, equal chances at those national assessments. And the equity of that is that every student needs something slightly different. So it might be that within your school is very diverse, and so you need like regular culturally relevant assessments in order to prepare your cohort for those national assessments. And then lastly, we have cultural capital. So how is the extra things that you're doing in the school? How do the field trips, the career fairs, the enrichment sessions at lunchtime, how does that give your students access to different representation and access to that feeling that they can do anything and their potential is sort of, you know, unlimited in a way. So the process of the audit, This is basically what we recommend in the process of changing curriculums. Number one is to form a subject team. It's so difficult to do this by yourself. It's, I think, definitely forming that subject team, even if you're the only one in your school that's like in charge of art, for example. What is a similar subject to you that you could link up with and connect and share ideas? So forming a team. Who will be involved in the curriculum auditing team? Ensure diverse representation within the team. Set objectives. So decide what modules, units, year groups, or area you're going to start with. What do you want to achieve by the end of 1 year, by the end of 2 years, by the end of 5 years? Number 3, complete the audit. Work through the audit framework, ensuring to encourage discussions with all team members of your subject team, with everyone being able to share input, opinions and inputs. Analysing and solidifying recommendations. So the group will basically set out some objectives and some clear steps, allowing 1 or 2 group leaders to establish those set of conclusions and sort of create those implementation, and then starting implementing changes. I want to sort of emphasize not to do everything at once, not that you're going to have the time anyway, but allowing this to be a gradual change. So implementing small changes and allowing your student and your parent and your teacher cohorts to feed into some of these changes. The last thing you want to do is do so much work trying to decolonize it in a certain way that you and your staff team think is right, and then to get feedback that it doesn't actually represent your student body. So that's what we mean by gradual, allowing that feedback. And then review and monitor. Consult your student body to encourage, to review the changes and provide feedback. Essentially, that's what I just said. So we're basically going to provide a copy of the auditing framework now, and whoever is still wanting sort of, you know, use this time that we have, we would love for everyone to download the audit, have a look through, depending on whether you're secondary school or primary school. And then we are here, while we're here, to answer any questions or offer any perspectives or share any ideas. Yeah, we would love to do that. So the auditing tool is simple to use. You've got questions based on different protected characteristics, but the first questions are going to be about assessments, classroom environment, pedagogy, and then you have your very specific questions that to do with each subject. So you can see on the audit, you can just click on the link to your subject and you'll get subject specific questions. If anyone wants to take some time now to review the audit that we put in the chat, you'll be able to complete this properly in your own time and once you formed your curriculum teams. However, it would be good for everyone to have a quick review of the audit, and while we're still here, to have an opportunity to ask any questions or to share any feedback when we come back as a group as well. Okay, so who do we have? So we still have Jennifer and Zarina on the chat. It'd be great to hear what you would like to do. How would you like to use this time? Do you want to review the audit while we're still on the call, or would you prefer to review it in your own time?
I'd like to do it in my own time, please.
Absolutely, that's absolutely fine. And we're going to share our email with everyone as well. So if you do get to, when you come to review it, any questions, we would be happy to answer. Also, if you want to jump on a call to discuss it, we're always open to that as well. So as we finish up, we have a few questions that we'd love to sort of get your feedback on. So number one is, what did you find most useful about this workshop? And is there any feedback in general? So we learned about the 4 areas for a holistic approach, the content in general, the audit framework, and just being on the call in general. I'm going to stop the recording now because we don't need to share our feedback with everyone, but we'll be sharing this recording with HEP, who will hopefully be able to circulate it.